Welcome, everyone. I'm Karen Dowell, Community Development Coordinator for Parkinson Canada. Thank you for joining us today here in Cambridge and online for our webinar on medical marijuana and Parkinson's disease. I'd like to take this opportunity to inform everyone that today's session is being recorded for future viewing and can be accessed by visiting our website at www.parkinson.ca. Parkinson's Canada position statement on medical marijuana is as follows. Marijuana, also referred to as cannabis, is legally accessible in Canada for medical purposes. To date, it has not been conclusively demonstrated by science-based evaluation that marijuana can directly benefit people with Parkinson's disease. There is a need for larger, controlled studies to better understand the efficacy of medical use of marijuana for Parkinson's. If you are considering medical use of marijuana for Parkinson's, we recommend you consult with your healthcare professional to carefully weigh potential risks and/or benefits for your individual situation. Parkinson's Canada provides credible, up-to-date information on Parkinson's and care management. We do not provide medical advice. Our purpose is to meet the needs of Canadians living with Parkinson's by enhancing their knowledge in order to make informed decisions. We will continue to monitor the topic of marijuana for medical purposes and will update our resources as new information becomes available. Before I introduce our speaker, I have a few housekeeping points to review. For technical support at any time during today's webinar, please click the tech support button at the lower right of your screen next to Ask a Question button. You will have an opportunity to submit a question at any point during today's session from your computer screen by clicking on the Ask Question button and typing in your question. Every effort will be made to answer all questions at this presentation, but we ask that the questions are of a general nature and not seeking specific medical advice. And now I'd like to provide a brief introduction of today's speaker. Jonathan Zaid is a knowledge integration student at the University of Waterloo and founder and executive director of Canadians for Fair Access to Medical Marijuana. Since 2007, he has been suffering from new daily persistent headache, a rare neurological condition that causes constant head pain and insomnia. After trying all available interventions to no avail, Jonathan finally gained some relief from medical cannabis. In 2014, he founded the not-for-profit patients' rights group, Canadians for Fair Access to Medical Marijuana, which aims to help others navigate and ultimately improve the issues and challenges associated with medical cannabis. Jonathan is recognized as a leading industry expert on the cost coverage of medical cannabis. He has advocated for patients' rights on industry panels and been featured in numerous television, radio, blog, and newspaper interviews. Today, Jonathan will present on the basics of medical cannabis, marijuana, including uses, access, cost coverage, and research. He will go over how the Canadian Medical Cannabis Registry system works and share insights into medical cannabis use among Parkinson's patients. Again, I remind you that if you are sending in questions, please make them general in nature. Jonathan, please come forward and speak.
Thank you for the introduction, Karen. Thank you so much, everyone, for here. And a special thanks, of course, to Parkinson Canada for hosting this information session and webinar on medical cannabis. So today, as Karen mentioned, we're going to be going over basically a Cannabis 101, so you get an overview of medical cannabis as a whole. We'll go over the history of medical cannabis, the medical properties, the use and administration of cannabis, research in PD, and also other symptoms that may be related. access under the ACMPR, cost coverage, legalization, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end as well. Just a quick disclaimer that the content provided in this information session is for informational purposes only and does not represent medical advice, an endorsement, or a recommendation on the use of medical cannabis by Parkinson Canada. So, to start it off, a history of medical cannabis, going quite a ways back, thousands of years, to 2700 BCE in ancient China, the emperor used medical cannabis to treat his gout and pain associated with that. And it continually spread throughout the Middle East and Asia for medical use. Fast forwarding many years, going into the late 1700s and 1930s, medical cannabis use was popularized in the Western world, in Europe and America, and it was actually recommended in medical journals in the US for pain, inflammation, and nausea, and was listed in the pharmacopoeia as a medicine that doctors could prescribe, and regularly did. But then things changed as prohibition was introduced. In 1923, in Canada, the Opium and Narcotic Control Act was introduced, and this started prohibition. In a similar time period in the US, prohibition was introduced as well. That was basically the end of medical cannabis research. All research shifted onto the harms associated with cannabis use and didn't focus on the medical benefits. So that's why today we really don't know everything we need to know about medical cannabis, and we'll talk about that a bit later. In 2000, there was a patient with severe epilepsy, I believe, and he got arrested for cannabis use, and he challenged it, saying that he needs to be exempted from the CDSA, from the laws controlling drugs in Canada, because it put his security of the person in jeopardy, and the courts agreed with him. And we'll see a number of times the courts regularly agree with patients on these charter challenges that led to the introduction of 3 different medical cannabis regimes. In 2001, Health Canada introduced the MMAR, which was the first medical cannabis regime, and it allowed patients to either buy medicine from Health Canada's supplier directly or grow it themselves or designate a producer. This regime lasted for about 10 years, but there was lots of challenges the government had with it. It was an administrative burden to them, and there was also a lot of complaints from law enforcement about enforcing these regulations on a local level. So they replaced these regulations with the MMPR in 2013, and the MMPR basically commercialized medical cannabis and created licensed producers and a licensing system for commercial growing. And then commercial growers could then supply patients instead of Health Canada doing it directly. Initially, only dried cannabis was available, and that was challenged in court. And then Health Canada introduced some regulations to allow for oils to be sold, as well as for patients to extract cannabis in any way they wish. And then in 2016, once again, we saw another challenge, this time on the basis that patients in the original MMAR regime wanted to continue growing, citing affordability and access issues, and they won that challenge. So the government basically combined the first two systems into the ACMPR, into what we have today, which is the current regime that provides access to medical cannabis on a federal level. So we often get this question, what's the difference between marijuana and cannabis, and what does that mean? Cannabis refers to the scientific name of the plant, and it's now preferred by the medical community for a few reasons. Marijuana generally refers just to the flowers of the female plant, what you typically think of when you think of cannabis, but there is medical properties to the leaves and to other parts of the plant, so cannabis could refer to that as well. And also, marijuana was created in the 1900s, and really it came out of a racist dialogue that was going on in the U.S., prejudicial use towards Mexican immigrants in a way to try to cast a negative light on cannabis. So activists and the medical community is now shifting away from marijuana and using cannabis instead. So now let's talk a little bit about the medical properties, the use, and the administration of cannabis. I think it's important for us to understand how many medical properties exist in cannabis and in the plant. So there's over 100 cannabinoids, and these are the medical properties that we most commonly talk about. The two ones that we looked at the most are THC and CBD. THC is the chemical that people think of when they think of marijuana. It's responsible for the high or the euphoric psychoactive effects that cannabis has. So recreational cannabis in the black market has bred cannabis to be high in THC to produce these effects. But there is also medical properties to THC, which includes analgesic, anti-nauseant effects, muscle relaxing effects, sedation, and appetite stimulant. And some of these effects can be useful in Parkinson's, as we'll talk later on. CBD is an area that's really exciting for the medical community. It's a non-intoxicating cannabinoid, but it's shown to have a lot of medical properties, including tremendous anti-inflammatory properties, analgesic, anxiolytic, and anti-epileptic. These are still being explored, but the medical community is really comfortable with CBD because it's generally considered a very safe substance. It's not psychoactive, so it doesn't carry the same kind of connotation and stigma that THC does. And then there's also all these other chemicals that are in the cannabis plant, which kind of further makes things a little bit difficult to study from a research perspective. And one of the things that people are looking at now more so is terpenes, and this is what is responsible for the smell and aroma that cannabis has. And the theory is that it's part of an entourage effect. So terpenes help modulate the cannabinoids to give them different effects. Some could reduce psychoactivity, some could help increase sleep or sedation. And this is why different strains, and I'll explain this later on as well, different strains of cannabis have different effects. The thought is that terpenes may be attributed to this. So when we look at medical cannabis, really the main things that patients need to know are the THC and CBD levels, as this is really the most useful information at this point. And so it's also good to have a biological understanding of how this works within our bodies. Lots of people are surprised that we actually have an endogenous cannabinoid system, the endocannabinoid system, and this is similar to how we have, an endogenous opioid system and process neurotransmitters. So we create endocannabinoids within our own body. One notable one is anandamide, which is similar to THC, and these are created by our own biological processes to regulate homeostasis, to keep our body level, including appetite, pain, mood, and memory. We have two different receptors within our body for cannabinoids, so this is how THC and CBD actually works within our body. THC mainly binds to CB1, which is in the nervous system in the brain, and CBD, it's unclear what effect it has on CB1, but it's more prevalent on CB2, where it is concentrated throughout the immune system. So when we talk about cannabis, there's many different kinds of cannabis and forms, and we're going to go through that to help give you an understanding of what we're really talking about. So herbal cannabis is what most people think of, and this is whole plant medicine. It's generally the flowers of the female plant, once again, as you can see in the picture on the top right, and it contains over 100 cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids. So there's a lot of different properties in this, and this is one reason physicians are a bit reluctant, because there isn't necessarily good evidence to show exactly which part of the plant does what to help. And these medical properties are actually not in the plant itself. It's on little glands on top called trichromes. So if you've ever heard of hash, this is what hash is. It's actually just the trichromes pressed together without the plant material. So there's many strains, thousands of strains of cannabis, herbal cannabis. So the different strains have different effects, and they're named different things, generally based on the recreational market, which has named them all kinds of crazy things, from Blue Dream to Pink Kush to Super Silver Haze. So some of the medical community and the producers have shifted away from that and branded it themselves. But you can find some information based on the anecdotal effects that patients have found from these strains. And also it helps patients talk about it, but at the same time it's not very scientific, because you can't test a strain and say for sure that's Pink Kush. You really just have to go by the word and the history of the breeder. So it's better at this point, because of those issues associated with strain naming, to look at it from what's called a chemotype profile, which is three main categories of strains. One is a 1-to-1 THC to CBD. It has equal amounts of THC and CBD. CBD also helps limit the potential for the psychoactive effect from THC. So if you have CBD and THC together, lots of people find that a beneficial combination. High CBD and low THC strains are not very psychoactive, if at all, so people aren't impaired by these strains generally. They have anti-inflammatory properties, and they are a good place to start for lots of patients because you don't have the risk of getting high in the same way, and then you could add in THC strains as you start trying new things. High THC strains are generally considered anything that is over about 8 or 10%. It depends on who you ask, but and it has very minimal amounts of CBD, generally negligible. There's another way of classifying strains, indica and sativa, and lots of people will ask about this. Initially, it was thought that it represented two distinct species of the cannabis plant, and there's been a lot of debate about this. But basically, new literature suggests that this isn't accurate. Again, it's not a very scientific way of classifying. It was really done by breeders and by dispensaries in a way to try to educate patients on what strains had what effects. And it was based loosely around plant structure, so sativas would grow taller and indicas would be shorter. But again, not a very scientific way of describing a plant. But it can still help describe effects. So you will see producers or others use these terms. And indicas, when people talk about an indica strain, they generally are referring to something that's more relaxing and sedating, with more of a full body feeling, compared to a sativa is uplifting and euphoric. People tend to use them more during the day as it has more of a cerebral kind of effect. And then there's lots that are a mix of the two. So that's herbal cannabinoids. That's it's also called phytocannabinoids, and that's from the plant itself. And we'll talk about the forms and ways to consume herbal cannabis in a bit. But there's also prescription cannabinoids, and mainly these are synthetic, but not all of them are. There's nabilone, which is a synthetic molecule similar to THC, and it is mainly used for pain and sleep and anti-nauseant effects. It is available by prescription, and it's commonly preferred by physicians to prescribe it first to try it out, just because they're more comfortable with prescribing a pill that is dispensed through a pharmacy and has a DIN number, a drug identification number. So this is just like any other prescription. Your doctor writes it, on a prescription pad, and it's easy for them in that way. There's also another prescription cannabinoid available in Canada. It's called Nabiximols, or Sativex is the brand name, and it's approved for cancer, pain, and also MS symptoms. It is available by prescription. It's quite expensive, and it's an extract of whole cannabis plant, so it's not synthetic. Some patients find it very helpful, but because of the price and also because it can sometimes cause mouth irritation from taking it, it's an oral spray that you just spray in your mouth. Patients tend to prefer herbal cannabis, from what I hear. There's also a couple other notable prescription cannabinoids. Marinol, you may see that in reference in research, and Epidiolex is a drug coming through the pipeline mainly for epilepsy, a CBD spray similar to Sativex that also we'll likely hear more about soon. So I've pulled some information from the Health Canada document for physicians as well as patients and merged them together to give you an idea of some contraindications and warnings about cannabis use. So people with hypersensitivity or allergy to cannabis obviously should be cautious about using it. One important thing is if you have a familial history of schizophrenia or personal history of psychiatric disorders, you should be careful about cannabis. The research is still out. It's not a full causation effect has not necessarily been established, but there's a thought right now that among a certain group of patients with a predisposition to schizophrenia, cannabis use can bring out that schizophrenia and worsen it. There's also, if you have previous substance use disorder, severe cardiopulmonary disease, or use other drugs that may be sedating, you should use extra caution around cannabis. In terms of short-term effects, most of them are fairly benign. It's dizziness, drowsiness, headache, dry mouth, throat irritation, coughing, impaired short-term memory and cognition, and paranoia and panic attacks. Lots of this research has been done solely on THC. So when we talk about administering THC with CBD or CBD by itself, some of these risks may not fully apply, especially when we talk about the memory and cognition and the panic attacks. It's thought that CBD is a safer substance and may not cause these types of things. And then in terms of the dry mouth and throat irritation and coughing, that's a risk associated with smoking mainly. For cannabis to be used long term, there is a few other things to consider. There's again the psychiatric disorder is a risk, as well as smoking risks can happen. There's also some other risks with decreased sperm count and cognitive development among mothers who use cannabis, as well as possible long-term negative effect on cognition. This research again is very mixed and doesn't really include the CBD aspect. And then there's a risk of dependence is fairly low, about just under 10%, but it can happen. Luckily, the withdrawal symptoms from cannabis use disorder tend to be much less severe than most prescription drugs. So now you probably have the question, so I've maybe decided to use herbal cannabis, but how do I use it? How is it used? So cannabis is mainly used through inhalation, and the reason for this is it's very easy, and it's also it has a very quick onset of action. So inhaled cannabis will take effect in a matter of minutes and last a couple hours depending on the person. And it's very easy to titrate because of this. And what that means is if you have a little bit and you feel like you need a bit more, you can take another puff of the vaporizer and use that. So vaporizers are devices that heat up the cannabis, and this is herbal cannabis, so that it releases the cannabinoids, it releases the THC and the CBD and the terpenes, and you get to inhale it. And it's not a smoke; it's actually it's really a vapor from these products. So you're not producing the byproducts that are harmful from a smoke, such as the tar and also the hydrogen cyanide and other byproducts that I believe smoking any substance has. Vaporizers limit that, and there's two that are Health Canada approved medical devices as well. Ingestion is also a very popular method of use, and it's becoming increasingly more so because of the producers being able to supply these. It takes a couple hours to take effect sometimes, so for some breakout pain or other conditions where you really need immediate relief, this won't necessarily do. It's more almost as a preventative. And it can last 4 to 8 hours, so this can be desirable in some people because you have sustained effects throughout the day. You don't have to worry about dosing, and also could help throughout the night to keep you to sleep. And oils and capsules can be purchased through licensed producers, and I'll go through that process next on how to actually access these medicines. You can take it by itself, the oils, or you can also mix it into a drink or into food, bake it into food, so there's a lot of different ways to take oils. One important thing though, and this is a common problem that patients may have early on, is that you take a dose of cannabis oil or some kind of ingestible cannabis product, and then you don't feel effects within an hour, and you take another dose and you don't feel effects, and you take another dose, and then it all hits you at once, and it ends up being a lot more than you really want to handle. So when you're trying cannabis oils, it's really important you take a dose. If it doesn't have effect, don't take another one for at least 12 hours or so, even 24 hours. You may want to wait at the beginning to make sure that you can get it out of your system to know what your optimal dose is. And then there's also all kinds of other products. Some of this is things that patients have created themselves and use, and some of it is really down the pipeline and will be the future of medical cannabis. None of these are available through the ACMP or the program, but patients do have the ability to process this themselves, so you can get dried cannabis or cannabis oil and then convert it into other products. This includes tinctures, which allow for sublingual use, so you can put cannabis in an alcohol extract, a tincture. You can put it under your tongue sublingually, and it allows for a very quick onset of action like vaporization, but then you don't have the issues with administering a vaporizer. And also transdermal, cream, patches, these are things that are becoming really looked at a lot. Patients make their creams and put it on joints and find that it helps reduce some pain. And then patches are really a future thing that's in development, and you'll be able to put a patch on your skin similar to other medicines, and it'll give a sustained release of cannabinoids throughout the day. Some people also put dried cannabis right into water with some fat usually in it, some milk or cream or oil even, and they then extract the tea just like making normal tea and drink the tea. So that's one other way of consuming it orally. There was a question that came up about cannabis use in long-term care facilities, and also this pertains to hospitals and really most public places. The regulations vary by province. Lots of provinces have instituted regulations around public vaporization of cannabis. They've lumped it in with the electronic cigarette regulations, including in Ontario. So patients may be limited from vaporizing or smoking in certain places, and this includes long-term care homes and hospitals. So patients in those facilities really need to look at the alternative forms of administration, including the oils for oral use, as those are being able to administered. And some hospitals, most specifically in Quebec, have actually made vaporization rooms or allowed vaporizers to be brought in. So we are seeing some changes. So that's a shifting area of policy. So some tips on using medical cannabis. The mantra is always to start low and go slow. As I mentioned with the oils, don't take 2 doses at once, and with the vaporizers, just try a little bit, and if you need a bit more, just try a bit more. It's better to have a bit less than to overdo it. There's no risk of a lethal overdose with cannabis, but there can be undesired effects from having too much of it. Generally, though, that ends up in a long nap, so it's not usually the worst thing. And then in terms of self-titration, patients, it can be a frustrating process to find the right dose, the right strain, but at the same time, this is also an empowering process for patients. You get to use your own medicine and titrate it, and patients can really get a lot of benefit out of that, I think. And so doctors will recommend a maximum dose, and then patients can work within that dose to see what they need throughout the day. The average dose is 1 to 2 grams of dried cannabis per day. There's also different strains and different forms of administration that may help for different symptom groups. So you may have a sleep problem or tremor, and oil could help the tremor, and vaporizers could help the sleep problem, or whatever it is. But you should try to keep track of what you're doing, including the dose, the strain, the symptoms treated, and the effectiveness. So then you can try to start extrapolating what strain is helping what and what form of administration. Lots of patients find they may use even 2 or 3 different strains for different purposes, or may use a high CBD strain during the day because it doesn't cause the psychoactive effects. But then the THC does have positive impacts, so they'll use it towards the evening and at night, and that will help them. And they don't have to go out or do anything, so it's not a big concern. Okay, so we talked a lot about how cannabis is used in the different forms, but then let's talk about the evidence that's actually behind that use. I'm sure a fair number of you have seen this video. I'm not going to play it, but you can find it on YouTube fairly easily. It was circulated pretty widely in the fall, and this gentleman has fairly severe Parkinson's symptoms, and he took some tincture, it looked like, or maybe possibly some oil, and within 15 minutes, his dyskinesia and his tremors basically stopped. And this kind of anecdotal evidence is really powerful, but as we'll talk further, we still have a lot of work to do in the research to back this up. So you may hear stories like this, and it's positive, and that's why we're talking about this and have the interest we do today, but we still need to develop the research to support patients like this who find tremendous relief with clinical guidelines and really good quality research. So in 2017, there was an analysis done of 10 studies in PD, and I'll go over it quickly. This goes over pretty much the clinical research area in PD. If it's a little hard to see, I'm sorry, I tried to blow it up as much as possible, but I'll try to speak about as much of it as I can. So in terms of the first 2 surveys are of patients reporting pretty positive effects from cannabis use. 46% describing some benefit, 31% with rest tremor, 45% with bradykinesia, and 14% of L-DOPA-induced dyskinesias. And then again, in a similar study, similar results. But these are surveys with small N numbers, small number of patients in these surveys, so it really doesn't necessarily give us much to go on. Continuing down, we have a number of clinical trials. Again, lots of them show some improvements. Some of them show less improvements with with one product didn't show any improvements, but with most of the herbal cannabis, it did show improvements. So we have a good basis to go on that cannabis has potential positive effects in PD, but at the same time, we still don't know specific doses, specific strains for what symptoms. So we still have that next step to go, that high level of clinical research. And really this is faced with every area in medical cannabis. This isn't unique to PD. There's a number of areas where patients have used cannabis historically, successfully, and safely, but we still don't necessarily have the clinical evidence to support that. So as the research, the authors talked about, despite the low sample size and quality of these studies, the data suggests that some motor symptoms in PD, in particular L-DOPA-induced dyskinesia, may respond to cannabis-based therapies. And the limitations, as I mentioned, are the small sample sizes and some other outcome measure and expectancy bias problems. So we really need these well-designed large-scale studies like we see with pharmaceuticals for the medical community to feel fully comfortable prescribing cannabis. And then non-PED research, there was another review done in 2017 of cannabis literature as a whole, found high level of evidence for chronic pain, so for longer term use with adults, and it found that they did find relief from cannabis use in MS-related muscle spasms, short-term prescription cannabinoids, I think that's mainly side effects, nausea and vomiting in chemotherapy. This has been one of the most widely used symptom areas of medical cannabis patients. So unsurprisingly, there's conclusive evidence that oral cannabinoids were effective, and also there's moderate evidence for sleep that it's effective. Lots of other conditions that they reviewed didn't have good quality of evidence, but also it didn't have evidence not supporting cannabis use. And I think that's an important distinction to make. Just because we don't have good quality evidence doesn't mean it won't work. It just means we need to get to that point. One thing that cannabis patients are unique from other pharmaceuticals is lots of patients find when they're on cannabis, they actually go off of lots of their pharmaceuticals. Most notably, 63% go off pharmaceuticals in general, but 30% off of pharmaceutical opiates, 16% off benzodiazepines, and 12% off antidepressants, and also other kinds of substances like alcohol and tobacco. So patients who are prescribed medical cannabis are going off of these substances, and we know for a fact that opiates and benzodiazepines have very severe side effects, some lethal in some cases. You know, we've heard a lot about the opiate crisis, and lots of patients that are overdosing currently are actually starting by being prescribed a pharmaceutical opiate and then, you know, getting addicted to it. So I really see it as a positive that patients are going off of cannabis, and patients find that they can also spare their quantities of opiates and benzodiazepines and reduce the side effects with them as well. So we've talked a lot about the research and how to use cannabis and what's in cannabis, but now you may be at a point where you're asking, okay, I want to try it. So I'll explain a bit about how to try medical cannabis. There's also information guide, if you don't get all of this, at cfam.ca, and this guide has information about how to access cannabis. So the ACMPR, as I mentioned in the history of medical cannabis, is the legal regime that governs the use of medical cannabis in Canada. It was introduced in 2016, and it is the only way to legally access cannabis. There's a few patients that still have injunctive relief, but today, if you're looking to access cannabis, this is the only way. You have to receive authorization from a physician. Nurse practitioners are in the guidelines, but their provincial colleges don't allow them to currently, but we may see some shift there. So currently any doctor in Canada can prescribe or authorize medical cannabis by filling out a medical document. There's one, again, on CFAM's website or on Health Canada's website. And this can be used just like a prescription. It contains basically the same information, your name, the amount prescribed, as well as some physician's information, and that's really all they need to do. So it's not a lot of work for physicians to do this. And after you've completed the medical document, you then have to register with it. So there's two ways to access cannabis. One through a licensed producer, and the other way is to produce it yourself or designate someone to do it for you. So most people, I think, do choose the licensed producer way. It's easier. You don't have to grow it yourself, but there's affordability issues that people haven't, or they prefer to grow it themselves, and they're able to do so. And there's a possession limit either way, which is 30 times your daily authorized amount, or 150 grams, whichever is less of the two. So talking about licensed producers, there's currently 30 plus licensed producers, and they're consistently getting new ones online. And I think, as we start to see legalization develop, there'll be a lot more as well. Licensed producers, after you've registered with them, you go through their own registration process. It's usually just a couple simple forms you fill out and send in, and then they ship you your medical cannabis directly to your residence or wherever you are. They can also ship it to a physician in some cases. And this is regulated and monitored by Health Canada. It's a very tightly regulated system. Licensed producers carry a variety of strains and products, so you should check with them and do some research to see if they have what you want before registering. You can't switch between licensed producers once you've registered, so it's important that you go with someone who can reliably supply your medicine. And some patients also choose to actually ask their doctor for more than one medical document. So if you have, let's say, 2 grams a day, you can get 2 medical documents with 1 gram a day, and that way you can register with 2 licensed producers so that you don't have any supply issues from just relying on one source. Sorry, I should go back quickly. And all these products are tested for safety, mold, and heavy metals. You may have seen some news lately about pesticide recalls. Health Canada has instituted random testing for that. They don't regularly test it, but I think we'll see some movement on that to try to, the industry really wants to try to start self-regulating, it seems, for those pesticide issues. So when you get products from licensed producers, you know the exact THC content, you know the exact CBD content, and some also test for terpenes, so you can ask for that as well if that producer does. And then talking about dispensaries and compassion clubs, you may have seen these around and most likely heard about them in the news. The first dispensary, though, actually opened in 1997 in BC. Just about a dozen or 15 years ago, there were some in Toronto that opened, and they opened to help supply patients that really needed this access, and they really did it out of a medical place. Lots of them even had secret locations, and you would have to register, similar to how you do with the licensed producer. They would kind of emulate that, but so they would try to control who registered and made sure they were a valid patient. But as things went on, as basically Trudeau got in place and promised to legalize cannabis, these dispensaries proliferated, and lots of them now don't serve a true medical purpose. They'll sell to anyone, and they do it really on an act of civil disobedience for the unjust laws around prohibition. They do offer education, but it's, again, not regulated, so it differs where you go, what level of education you'll get. Patients do like them, though, because you can go into the store, see what you're getting. Compared with the other system, you just get it in the mail. There's also a diversity of products available, but again, it's not regulated, which means it's not tested for anything necessarily, so there's some risk involved with that. Police in certain regions, though, have decided to leave them alone, and most notably Vancouver and Victoria have actually regulated them to allow them to get business licenses, and that way they can zone them better than just spreading like the Wild West. And Toronto has taken the opposite approach and done a lot of raids and crackdowns on dispensaries to try to shut them down, but they just pop up the next day, so seems like kind of a fruitless approach at this point, but we'll see what happens with that. So after you get your medicine, there's still an issue that lots of patients face, which is affordability and cost coverage. So medical cannabis can cost anywhere between about $5 and $15 a day for an average dose, but it really depends on what you're using. There's sales tax applied to it as well, which can further adds to the problem. So cost coverage right now is quite limited. The most notable 2 plans are Veterans Affairs and the University of Waterloo Student Union, which is the case that I set for my own use. So these two plans actually do cover medical cannabis on a case-by-case basis, and other formularies, or other plans rather, are doing this process, so patients can approach their plan sponsor and get coverage. But no formularies listed, which means that you're not going to get coverage automatically. It's going to be about advocating for coverage. The only exception to that rule is health spending accounts. If your health plan offers one of those, you can claim it in that. But really, at the end of the day, there's not much coverage available. The only benefit to purchasing it, when you purchase it through the legal system, you can also claim it to the CRA as a tax deduction as a medical expense. And in terms of public coverage, very limited, mainly just auto or workplace injuries are covered at this point. So if you're interested in advocating for coverage, it's really up to the plan sponsor. When we're talking about private insurance coverage, they get to choose what contract and what plan they buy. So it's about advocating to them to either permit a special exemption or modify their plan in some way that would help permit cannabis to be claimed. And this has been done successfully, although it's a difficult process for patients. The lack of a DIN number is frequently an issue. But there was a recent Nova Scotia human rights case that said that the employer discriminated against the employee by not covering it. I think it was a union, actually, sorry. So there is some movement in this area, and CFAM is very actively involved in advocating for cost coverage. So I'm sure that within the next year or so, we will see shifts within this area as well. It is harder, though, for people who are retired, because when you try to use arguments about workplace productivity or about less sick days and those kinds of things, the employer really doesn't care as much because you're retired. So just to have a quick understanding of what legalization means from the patient perspective, Justin Trudeau promised to legalize, regulate, and restrict access to marijuana. But really the legalization part is what lots of people got excited about, but the regulating and the restricting part is really going to matter a lot, because we're going to have to see how the regulations evolve. So in terms of what we're doing to make sure that patients' voices are heard as part of this process, we held a patient roundtable with the Arthritis Society and Canadian AIDS Society, and the patients got to meet members of the task force on legalization. This task force was developed to come up with the framework for cannabis policy and legalization. And it was really a transformational shift. Before this meeting, lots of our concerns were going unheard, it seemed like, and then as patients met with the task force, they really shifted their focus. And in the end, as you'll see, I think we're pretty happy with the results. So we were recommending that all forms and potencies are available. The supply is through different distribution options, including on-site retail like pharmacies, not just mail order, increasing education, removing the sales tax, helping insurance coverage, and also research funding and policy changes to help promote research. You can read the complete submission as well on CFAM's website. Just to give you a quick idea of what the task force took in from that work we did, in their final report, they said to maintain a separate medical cannabis framework. This was really important to us. And they also said to monitor and evaluate patients' reasonable access to cannabis, apply the same tax system, is an area we are still working on. We'd like to see no tax on medical cannabis. And they also said to promote and support research, as well as the development of education and information, and then to reevaluate all this in 5 years. So we see a pretty close reflection to what we were recommending to what they are now recommending in their report to the government. So we'll have to see what the next steps are. Legalization will be introduced in the spring. This is just the initial bill. Then it has to go through the parliamentary process. And other jurisdictions will have a number of aspects to regulate as well, most notably distribution by the provinces. And I think during this time, it's really important that patient voices are heard. Join groups like CFAM to help medical cannabis advocacy. You can write letters to politicians about the problems you're having, and also speak about your medical cannabis use, because there's still so much stigma that patients face, and I think speaking about it goes a long way. So with that, thank you for your time, and we'll do some questions and answers as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. You've provided a lot of information, and it's obvious that there's a great deal of interest in this subject. We'll now begin by addressing the questions that have come in online, interspersed with those that come up in the room. We have nearly 700 people registered online today, so we'll just see how things go. Paul?
Our first question is a fairly simple one from someone online that says, how does one go about finding a licensed producer?
So if you just Google licensed producer Health Canada, they have a list of them. It's also linked on CFAM's site. And there's also some resources in our Getting Started guide that can help patients both find licensed producers and also find clinics that may that you can get a referral to from your physician if they're uncomfortable prescribing it.
A question from the room?
Jonathan, I don't know, you didn't address the issue that was recently all over the news about licensed producers, a couple of them, I think, who had to recall a whole year of their supply because their cannabis was tainted,
yeah,
and the class action lawsuit against that. So my question is, what are you doing, or what is the government going to do to ensure that licensed producers who are going to provide supposedly safe materials to the public?
Yeah, no, that's definitely an important question. So what happened was the recalls, they found some products that contain banned pesticides, and the concern is that these pesticides produce hydrogen cyanide when heated, so they're not studied in inhalation. They're only safe for fruits and vegetables that we consume. So this is a problem that the regulators saw in Colorado. So I think it's important to institute mandatory testing. We've been in constant communication with Health Canada since the recalls happened. But as their statement said just a couple of days ago, they've deemed this as a very low health risk at this time because of the very trace amounts of pesticides that they found in these products. They don't deem it to be a current health risk. So really from our perspective, now that the recalls already happened, we're really just hoping to see measures put into place to prevent it from happening again.
We have another question from someone online. You talked about clinical trials. Are you aware of any current trials that people living with Parkinson's can participate in?
I'm not aware of any current clinical trials in Parkinson's. There are some clinical trials, but not in Parkinson's.
Hi, I just wanted to know, right now I go through one of the clinics, but I was referred by my neurologist to get it. Is that the only way you can do it, or can you go direct from filling out the form with your doctor to the supplier?
Yeah, you can go direct. So if the neurologist felt comfortable, they could do it. There's no limitation on which doctors can prescribe, with the notable exception of Quebec. They have to be registered by the college, so there's some issue there. But for most of the country, any doctor can authorize it, and then the registration process is just you can do yourself. So once you receive the medical document from a physician, you can register how you wish.
So all those clinics that are set up now, you don't have to go through them?
No, most people going through them are going to them because their initial physician didn't feel comfortable prescribing it and would refer to them to do all of the prescribing and the registration.
Okay.
And just to kind of follow up with that, someone online wanted to know, how do those clinics kind of fit into the big picture?
So the clinics right now have been set up because access is difficult. There is still a lot of physicians that don't feel comfortable prescribing it or don't feel like there's enough evidence to prescribe it. So these clinics have brought on specialized physicians that deal with this on a regular basis, and some of them you can go to directly, some of them you can get referred to, and then they then will help you get access to a doctor that knows about cannabis and then register. The one warning I would have with that is that some of them do have associations with certain producers, so do some research before you go to the clinic and make sure it's a reputable clinic. There's a website, liftcannabis.ca, that has reviews on doctors and clinics, so that's one resource to go to.
Another one from the room?
So again, I just wanted to ask, would there be any research or benefit from going to the clinic? Would they be compiling any information that would be useful?
Yeah, so some of the clinics are research focused, and they are doing, like record keeping to try to do surveys and other clinical research out of the clinics, but that's not necessarily all of them. Yeah, so it really, again, you just have to do your research and see which ones are what you're looking for. Yeah.
Another participant online wants to know if cannabis is odorless.
Cannabis is not odorless. So in terms of the plant, it has a lot of odor. Vaporization does have odor, generally speaking, at least. And the oils have fairly minimal odor. So the oils, if you're looking at ingesting a product, aren't something to be concerned about in terms of odor.
And one from the room?
Yes, in terms of efficacy,
Yeah.
do you know of any studies that have looked at placebo effects with regards to efficacy?
Yeah, so the placebo effect with cannabis is a difficult thing to kind of measure because it's, at least initially, it was very hard to get accurate placebos where people didn't know that they were actually consuming cannabis, especially when we talk about THC. It's pretty hard to blind that, so it's hard to make it so that people don't know if they're on the placebo or not. So there has been some development in that area, but it's still something that needs to be sorted out. But it's done at the clinical trial level with other medicines. So I think that just is the answer for this, that cannabis, as it goes through the bigger clinical trials, they'll be able to account for placebo effect better than these small surveys with or studies with 12 patients.
Another online participant has asked, because you talked about reducing prescription medication when using cannabis, do you know if it can be used as an alternative to levodopa that's used for Parkinson's patients?
I don't think it can be used as an alternative, no. Again, this is an area where the endocannabinoid system may play a role in Parkinson's, but we really need a lot more research in that area before making those kinds of recommendations.
Another one from the room?
I have two questions, Jonathan. First of all, at the beginning of the presentation, you did state the difference between your term, which you've been using throughout the whole session today, as cannabis versus the word marijuana. However, all the literature and the federal government refers to the term marijuana. So how do you rationalize that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So that's really why CFAM as an organization was named Canadians for Fair Access to Medical Marijuana, because the government used that. But in all of the new documents they've been releasing, they're switching to cannabis. Including the new regulations are the access to cannabis for medical purposes instead of marijuana. So I think that shift is happening at a government level. So when I first got involved in this a few years ago, if you said medical cannabis to someone, they didn't always recognize what that was, but they always would know what medical marijuana was. And I think now I see the shift where the vast majority of people, at least in government, now know medical cannabis.
One further question about the cost of it. Obviously quite expensive. Do the Ontario drug benefits programs cover it at all for seniors?
No, unfortunately not. There's really minimal cost coverage available, public, seniors coverage or private. It's really hard from an affordability perspective at this point. That's really one of the biggest, if not the biggest barrier to access for patients. So we're doing a lot of work in that area, but unfortunately I don't have a better, easier answer for you at this point. It's just really something difficult, but at the same time there is some licensed producers that have affordability or discount programs, so you can look and contact them, and they may take 15 or 25% off the prices for people with low incomes or seniors or different categories that they come up with.
Thank you.
We have another online participant that has a comment and a question. First of all, the comment, great overview of the system and the process. Do you have more case studies for Parkinson's patients available?
I can post the review, and I think that references a number of case studies, but it's not something that we personally do. We don't personally do research, so.
Another one from the room?
Yeah, I personally use marijuana in the evening, and I do find it has very calming effects, especially on my tremors. Is it possible to get the oil for my vaporizer, where I don't get the eye effect, but I will get the cannabinoid effect?
Right now, from my understanding, most of the oil products that the licensed producers are producing are for oral use, so they're not for vaporizer use. So if you wanted to vaporize a CBD product that won't have that effect, it would have to be the dried form of that in the vaporizer, not an oil in a vaporizer.
The vaporizer pot in the machine.
Yeah, there's some that can do both or dried, and yeah, the other way is you could buy the dried and then make it into the oil for the vaporizer, but that's a harder process.
But you could at that point get the bud form with less THC in it and more cannabinoid.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes in the bud form too.
And we have another online participant that mentioned that you had talked about the risk of cannabis for substance abusers.
Yeah.
And that you had a fact later in your presentation that talked about some folks benefiting and being able to use less of the substance. Could you just clarify that?
Yeah, it's just a warning from Health Canada they put out. I think, from their perspective, they just want to ensure that people that have addictive tendencies, if you will, they don't want it to be prescribed to them. But I think, when you're closely monitored and you're using it to try to go off other, addictive substances, then that's positive. And physicians, I have heard of them prescribing it for that sole purpose of harm reduction to try to go off of other prescriptions.
We have another one from the room.
I'll also, sorry, I'm going to put up the next slide, which is references to the content that was in here so that people online can see it. And again, it'll be posted online after.
Thank you. With regards to the cost of the cannabis, what about people growing their own? If you have, a garden, can we do that yet?
Yeah, so if you take the medical document and register with Health Canada to produce it yourself, you can grow it, in your own residence. And also now they even allow outdoor growing as well. So you just have to register with Health Canada instead of a producer. And you can even once you've done that, you can even use that Health Canada license to order interim supply from a producer if you have crop problems or need some while it's growing.
Online participant wants to know if they've been approved for medical marijuana. Can they travel internationally?
No, so the approval is just for within Canada, and this is really difficult. I mean, even speaking personally, I use medical cannabis, and my family lives in the U.S. and I can't visit them very easily. So there are a couple options. If you do really need to travel, and you can switch on to the prescription cannabinoids like Nabilone or like Sativex. That allows you to travel with it legally, but you can't bring herbal cannabis internationally.
One last one from the room.
Just an interesting question, actually, you haven't touched on it, is that I'm aware, and I believe this is fact, that both the United States and Canada own the patents for cannabis or marijuana. And of course, they made it a Class 1 illegal substance, and with licensed producers now getting into the business, with a number of health ministers or former health ministers involved in these licensed producers. I'm wondering whether whether you can clarify whether it is legal, who owns the patents, and why did they get the patents when they thought this was going to be such a terribly dangerous drug?
Yeah, I've heard a bit about that. I'm not aware of any in Canada, though. I'm just aware of the U.S. one that you mentioned. Mainly, I think it's CBD for neuroprotective properties or something along those lines. Yeah, and prohibition as a whole has, a lot of, weird things like that. It's not a sensical policy approach. So I think we see things like that happen. It doesn't make sense, when cannabis prohibition was introduced, the American Medical Association was lobbying against it, and now that we're coming out of prohibition, they were lobbying against prohibition. Now they're lobbying for prohibition in a way they don't want it in the medical context. So I think, we see a lot of those kinds of things.
Another online participant has said, you mentioned there are multiple CBD types. Is there one type or strain of CBD that is more effective for tremors than another?
So there's different strains that have CBD. So CBD is just the cannabinoid that's tested, but you could have a multitude of strains that have the same level of CBD, but they may have some different effects. Generally, that's attributed to the terpenes most likely. So that's why if you try a strain, let's say, that's 10% CBD, 1% THC, you may try another strain that's the same ratio and it helps and the first one doesn't because of those different properties. And really, that's why physicians, again, are a bit uncomfortable because we can't say strain X will work for this.
Are there any more questions? I see we're coming up on 12 o'clock. Any more questions in the room? 1 o'clock. The time change there. No other questions in the room? Well, thank you again, Jonathan. This has been very interesting and, of course, lots of interest, and you've given a tremendous amount of information. So on behalf of Parkinson's Canada, I want to thank everyone for participating in this afternoon's webinar. For more information on living with Parkinson's or to access a recording of today's webinar for future viewing, please visit our website at www.parkinson.ca. If you have further questions regarding today's session, feel free to contact us by email at info@parkinson.ca or call us at our toll-free number 1-800-565-3000. Now, before you log off, please take a few minutes and give us your feedback by completing a short survey. Your input is important and will help identify topics of interest for future webinars, as well as help us better meet your needs. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.